afternoon, one and all. My name is Gillian. I'm from the Institute of Policy Studies, which is a center that is related to the Kuan School of Public Policy. I'm focused on public policy and governance in Singapore, but the school is focused on training the leaders of Asia of the future and leaders of Asia of the current status too, because the school welcomes a lot of civil servants, policy makers, as well as leaders of the NGO sector right over Asia. So we're very pleased to have as our special guest at the school Professor Paul Light. Professor Paul Light is a scholar and also an author on issues to do with governance and primarily in the US. But we're very happy to have him here for 3 weeks to share with us the challenges he's faced in the US, but also some of the solutions that he is hunting for, looking for to improve governance in the US, which hopefully will be useful for us here in Asia as well as in Singapore. The topic of today's public lecture is Driving Social Change, Still Searching for Social Entrepreneurship. I think Professor will explain what he means by social entrepreneurship and how that is one of those solutions that he's looking for in terms of resolving or tackling the governance challenges he faces at home. It's a concept that we are familiar with in Singapore, although it is quite fuzzy and there are not very good definitions of it. So hopefully, as Professor Light takes us through his thoughts on social entrepreneurship, it will be useful for you too. He'll speak for about 30 to 35 minutes, and then we can get a conversation together, right? About the governance challenges and how social entrepreneurship may help us address those challenges that we face more creatively, whether it is in the US or whether it is in all the different Asian countries you come from, or in Singapore as well. Okay, so please join me in welcoming Professor Paul Light, who is the Paulette Goddard Professor of Public Service at New York University's Robert F. Wagner School of Public Service. Over to you, Professor Light.
Thank you. You should know right off the bat that I don't believe in social entrepreneurship. I like it, but I'm not a promoter of it. I study it. So I'm looking for concrete knowledge on what it is, when you use it, how it fits in the stream of consciousness about alternatives to traditional government and NGO delivery of services and efforts to solve very difficult problems. I mean, that's what it's about. It's not about finding the heroes in this room. And I talk to my students. I'm teaching public policy. In the fall, I was just looking before I came up. I've got 120 students, and they'll be in a big theater like this. And when we start talking about social entrepreneurship, oftentimes it's about identifying the one person in the room who might be able to pull it off. I think that's not particularly productive from the standpoint of actually understanding how new combinations of ideas, which is what social entrepreneurship is, to me, how those can help us. And sometimes we need new combinations of ideas to solve problems or activate publics or defend solutions that are already on the books. We might need new combinations of ideas to do the tasks needed to solve problems, but it's about the problem. It's not about calling yourself a social entrepreneur and getting an award as a hero. We have too much of that going on, and not enough recognition that social change often involves broad coalitions of people, and many of the best solutions that we've developed for solving difficult social problems were developed by teams and collectivities or collections of people and organizations forming coalitions to find answers to vexing problems. So instead of being about the individual, the social entrepreneur or the social innovator or the person who runs a social enterprise, we need to be talking about the problem that we seek to solve and how to do it well, and then how to defend it once we have begun the process of producing a new solution to an existing problem. I was going to deliver a talk on the Proverbs of social entrepreneurship, but I'm not going to do that. I've been here for a week and a half. I've seen a lot of activity. I've met with a lot of people in government. I was here about 10, 12 years ago for a ministerial conference at Istana. And, you know, Singapore's changing. It's a very interesting place. I've mastered your bus and subway system. Although I was on a bus today and I was on the right bus, but I was not at all sure that I was going the right direction, which is the scholar's dilemma, to go to the innovator's dilemma. I do want to note here that a proverb is a statement of intuitive belief in what one does. And they're often accompanied by parables. So we tell stories about the things that we think are the right approach to doing something. And we can think of that from religions, or we can think of that in terms of the stories, the proverbs that emerged from the pioneer period in Singapore, George Washington in the United States, and the cherry tree. Not true, but interesting that, you know, we make mistakes along the way. So I talked about this at some point to say that, you know, proverb is a statement of what we should do. That's it. And they are not principles. They are not proven scientific facts. We say you should do something, compelling guidance, inspirational tone, do the right thing, take risks, be passionate, you know, try new combinations of ideas, work 24/7, you know, be heroic, be unreasonable, be impatient, and you will solve social problems. And that could be true. It could be false. And, you know, we have good reaction to this from Herbert Simon, an economist who was working at Rensselaer Technical University in the United States, when he wrote an article called The Proverbs of Public Administration. Some of you may have stumbled across it. It was an attack certainly made against the notion that we had a science of public administration. There had been a set of papers published in the mid-1930s called Papers on the Science of Administration, and Simon's approach was to basically say they're proverbs. They're, you know, suggestions, and they are notions about what we should do by way of span of control, for example. You know, you all know about span of control, the notion that no supervisor should supervise more than 6 direct reports, right? That was a presentation in the Papers on the Science of Administration, and a span of control of 1 to 6 has been generally accepted in government for many decades. Does anybody know where that particular proverb came from? Any pianists in the room? Anybody take piano when you were growing up? There is nobody here in this entire room. You did. Yes. That whole notion of span of control is based in part on the number of notes that you can play on the piano at one moment in a chord. That's it. You know, that's what we call a proverb. Now, what the appropriate span of control is, you know, a debatable proposition. So what Simon did was say, you know, proverbs can set unrealistic expectations, cult-like behavior. You know, that there's one way, there's one best way to shovel coal, which is where Taylorism and scientific management came from. And I saw in a presentation last week somebody refer to Taylorism 2.0. And I'm like, Taylor would be like spinning in his grave. Well, he must be on the notion that there's a Taylorism 2.0. I mean, the whole language that we're going to update Taylorism, the science of administration, is problematic, but he certainly wouldn't call it 2.0. Proverbs are true unless they're not true. Some are just wrong. I mean, my point here on social entrepreneurship is that we have very different definitions of what it is. It's a contested term. It's a contested argument about how we solve social problems. And this space now surrounding alternative methodologies for solving social problems is filled with terminologies that are ill-defined. Social innovation, social enterprise, corporate social responsibility, social entrepreneurship. Honestly, I'm a former grant maker. I worked for the Pew Charitable Trust in Philadelphia, and I got to tell you, if you put the word social in front of just about anything and throw it at one of our strategic philanthropists or venture philanthropists or entrepreneurial philanthropists, they'll fund it. Because, it's got to be important if it's got the word entrepreneurship or innovation or venture or whatever on it. So it's a contested space, and we're all right in this room, correct, in this room to say, what does all of this mean? How do we teach it? We get these students and bright people who want to change the world, and they say, I want to be a social entrepreneur. And I say, well, what do you mean by that? What you say you want to be an entrepreneur? What exactly do you mean by that? Why do you want to be an entrepreneur, and what does being a social entrepreneur mean? It's like, well, I can take care of this right away. You want to be a social entrepreneur? I hereby appoint you one. You want to be a social entrepreneur? Just raise your hand. So the endeavors here at a university and a school of this caliber are required to confront concepts like this with a healthy amount of skepticism, to say, wait a second, what does this mean? Who's using this term? Why is it contested? Why has social entrepreneurship and social enterprise, why have these terms emerged? Corporate social responsibility, is it real or not? I went online yesterday looking for the top companies that are doing CSR, and the best I could do was find the top companies rated by Forbes for having high reputational CSR, right? Am I right? So we can rate whether or not your reputation for CSR is good. Like I can say Microsoft is the most highly rated company in America, or the world actually, of course, for its reputation for corporate social responsibility. But do we know? We know whether people are reporting. We know whether people are publishing corporate social responsibility reports. There's a good piece of research done. I don't know where this scholar found this idea. It's very clever, but he did a coding of CSR reports and calculated the number of pictures with happy people in them in the CSR report and correlated that to CSR ratings and discovered that it's a negative relationship. The more happiness you show in your CSR report, the less CSR you're likely to be doing, but we're not really sure what it is. So you see it's a contested space. And there's some really interesting scholarship going on, and I'm contesting the space. And I've got to tell you, one of the things we need to understand from just the whole notion of this contested space is that there is a conventional wisdom, a social equilibrium about social entrepreneurship, social enterprise, social innovation, and so forth. There is a belief about what it should be and how you define it, and if you challenge that conventional wisdom, what happens? It challenges back. You don't get invited anymore to speak about it, and you may already be saying, my goodness, I wish I hadn't come to this thing. How do I get out without light seeing me? Are you thinking that right now? Because if you are, it's okay to get up and leave, So look, what I want to say is just a couple of things. That we have an obligation as we launch students into this space to understand what's going on here. That this term, social entrepreneurship, and the associated terms in this general space in between that seems to exist in between government, nonprofits, and businesses, but has webs into all of these arenas. This is a very interesting concept, and we need to tell our students and people who wish to engage in social change through these devices what they're doing and where they can do it, okay? So one of the things that I say here is that we've got these two theories of social entrepreneurship, and they nicely stack into an exclusive vision of the entrepreneur and entrepreneurship as the product of a lone wolf. I had this conversation with Bill Drayton, the founder of Ashoka, and I've been doing this about as long as he is, studying it and playing around with social innovation, as we used to call it, or policy innovation. I did my dissertation on the president's agenda in the United States, and we looked at policy innovation. How do presidents develop their legislative agendas? And Bill Drayton argued to me that there's one social entrepreneur per 10 million. Let's think about that for a second. That's a rather sobering thought for anybody in this room who wishes to be a social entrepreneur. If I tell you right away, the odds of you being a social entrepreneur in this room, 1 in 10 million, so there's probably no one in this room that has a fighting chance of being a social entrepreneur. So remember when I asked you want to be an entrepreneur? Didn't I? And did you say yes? Not really. I'm embarrassing you, but you did, right? No way. Can't have it. 1 in 10 million. You're not going to make it. So you have this exclusive definition of social entrepreneurship that it belongs to a class of people who are unreasonable, lone wolves. All they need is a garage. There's a wonderful piece about the garage mythology in Western culture. That, somebody goes into their garage or their basement and they think, or their kitchen, and they come up with a recipe, metaphorically, for solving a problem. And they work down there. You don't know what they're doing. You hear some hammering from time to time, or you hear some pot stirring from time to time, or whatever. And they come up with an idea. And that is simply not true. The narrative about social entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship in general is just not that way. Every story has a backstory when you start to drill in it about the complexities of actually bringing new ideas to market, or bringing new ideas through the very difficult policy process. The second vision is an inclusive vision, that anybody can do it to a certain extent. You have to have a great passion, but it's the product of many actors and methods, many paths, many participants. It's inclusive. And you can choose. If you're a funder, you may prefer the exclusive definition because it's going to be easier to implement. If you're teaching at a school like Lee Kuan Yew, you may prefer the inclusive and say everybody in this room can do this with a set of skills that we can teach. And a passion and commitment. Okay? So that's as much as I'm going to say, except for the notion that this exclusive vision is the dominant definition of how we do things. We got to find the one person in this room who's got the answer. And she's going to bring it to fruition, and then she's going to win the Nobel Prize. Because there's a lot of energy in this whole notion about honoring the individual who came up with the idea, like Steve Jobs. He did it, right? Thomas Edison invented the electric light. My last name is Light, so he must have. How many of you believe Thomas Edison invented the electric light? Well, I've already set you up. Anybody who raises your hand is going to get knocked down. He didn't. He invented a new delivery mechanism and installed it in my neighborhood in New York City. That's where the delivery system for moving electricity and getting customers to accept electricity was tested and determined. He eventually lost the war over electricity to Tesla and Westinghouse, and the electricity systems that we get in our homes are not the ones that he had hoped would be adopted. Be that as it may, we have this exclusive vision. So I continue to search for social entrepreneurship and try to understand a rapidly evolving space where there is very little research. It's moving quickly. We understand some things about how innovations and patents and breakthroughs occur, and what we find is that both of these visions are true. It's not an either or, it's an and or. You don't have to choose. We find that teams are actually more effective, according to research, on the long tail of innovation. When we look at patents awarded in the United States, and that's a measure, it's just a measure. So a patent is an acknowledgement of a new combination of ideas that does not infringe on an existing combination, an existing idea. So we have a Patent and Trademarks Office that ironically will receive your application for a patent online, but to this day, it is my understanding that the application received online is then printed out, stapled, and put in a file to be reviewed. So it's a delivery mechanism for getting the application to you, but we're not working that record online in any way. At any rate, what we find is that teams and individuals both are quite capable of producing new combinations of ideas, which is how we define generally within this space social entrepreneurship. The thing I need to tell you is that the research strongly suggests that teams have a slightly higher chance of success. It's not to say there aren't heroes out there who come up with great ideas, or small pairs of people. There's a new book out called The Power of Two. I'm like, okay, and it's not one. The Death of Genius is kind of the subtitle. There's no one genius. It's always at least two people working together. Jobs and his partner, an actual developer of the new combination of ideas, was, do you know who Jobs' partner was? Steve Wozniak. He gets no credit whatsoever. Jobs was the face of the company. And you go down the list and you find pairs and teams and so forth. And the research is suggesting that the inclusive vision, where you have teams, you do crowdsourcing, you solve problems through integration of ideas from a large sample or a committed group of people working in a laboratory someplace like the Westinghouse Laboratories, the Bell Laboratories, the Rockefeller Foundation Social Innovation Laboratories, that you get individuals producing breakthrough ideas and you get teams producing breakthrough ideas, but teams have lower failure rates. Why is that? Why would a team have a lower failure rate with social innovation, social entrepreneurship, breakthrough ideas? Why would a team have a lower failure rate than an individual? I was talking to somebody today about an innovative organization here in Singapore, and we were talking about it, and is it making money? How are they funding themselves? And we were talking about it. It's a kitchen, it's a cafe model. It's not 18 chefs. It's 18, right? Yeah. That's not the case, but this person's reflection was that the food is too good. They're too passionate about the food, and they're losing money because they should lower the quality of the ingredients just a little bit so they can hit their price point. So what happens in terms of the individual, the exclusive model, is that the individual can be shrouded in his or her beliefs to the point where they're too passionate and not practical enough. And so they will stay with the idea longer than perhaps they should, and they become so committed to it that they won't let go and they won't amend. They've discovered this idea, and there's a messianic impulse that we see in the literatures through content analysis, which I've done of the literatures on social entrepreneurship, the books. Clayton Christensen's The Innovator's Dilemma, this notion that, this is a certain kind of person who does this, and what happens, and the reason teams do better, is that teams, or have a lower failure rate, is that teams are good at washing out bad ideas. They get rid of them and knock them out. Now, do individuals in the exclusive model produce breakthrough ideas? Yes. Do teams produce breakthrough ideas? Yes. But when we talk about the long tail of entrepreneurship and innovation, what we're talking about is the failure rate. Teams have a higher success rate because they fine-tune their ideas. They get the patent on earlier attempts. Not all patents are successful on the first round. Not all applications, but you can go back. There's no limit to the number of times you can apply. So you have lower failure rates among teams, somewhat higher success rates, but both of these visions are acceptable. The question for us in this room, the people who want to be social entrepreneurs, the people who want to teach social entrepreneurs, the people who want social entrepreneurs to come into the public space and do their work, and not see social entrepreneurship and social innovation as antithetical to government. Government can't do it. The argument in the exclusive community is nonprofits, old nonprofits, can't do it because they're old. In the United States and Europe, to a certain extent, large old nonprofits are called legacy nonprofits. They're incapable, according to the exclusive definition, of creating new ideas because they're old. Even though there's substantial evidence that they do produce innovation, it's just not their full-time preoccupation. So we have these two, and your job here, and my job as scholars and teachers and actors who are seeking to change and address difficult problems, wicked problems even, is to confront these visions and start to say, well, how do we teach you to be successful in addressing problems that are of great concern using methods that are powerful regardless of whether you decide to go the exclusive path or the inclusive path. What do you need to know? What do we need to teach? And let me tell you, how long have we just said a little bit, well, we probably won't take all of that. How do you teach people to be successful whatever path they choose? How do we and what do we teach you to be effective in making choices about the precious resources that you have available? And the resource that all of us have available that is really precious is time. And we don't want to waste it and grind away. I'm fond of joking that under the exclusive vision, you are not allowed to have a dog. By the way, I have not seen any pets in Singapore. Is that because there are no pets allowed? Do people not have dogs and cats and things like that? Do they? We got more dogs. Of course, they could be large rats. I don't know in New York City than you can imagine. But my standard joke was you cannot have a dog if you're in the exclusive path of social entrepreneurship because you can't take them out. You don't have time for it because you're so possessed by creating change that you cannot walk your dog. The best you can have if you are exclusive, the lone wolf entrepreneur, no pun and metaphor abuse, is a cat. Because cats require no care whatsoever, and they don't want any care. That's the joke. We have a large number of cat lovers here, or a significant deficit in humor, or I'm just not delivering this joke right. It's just not going over. So look, where I start with scholarship now on this topic is to say, okay, let's accept both visions of social entrepreneurship. Let's take them. It happens in different ways. What do we need to teach? What are the primary tasks that need to be mastered in order to be successful. If we define social entrepreneurship as a new combination of ideas for fundamentally disrupting the prevailing wisdom, or what we sometimes call the social equilibrium, and we say, okay, it's this new combination of disruption, unsettlement. Now we're going to irritate the status quo, and we're going to change it by bringing new ideas into being. What do we need to teach? And the first thing I'd say, I'm going to just go through 4 different things real quickly. The first thing I'd say is we need to teach our students that business and social entrepreneurship are not the same. And that business-like thinking is not the answer to every problem. Rigorous thinking is the answer or the need. Wherever you do this, we've always said to nonprofits, at least in my corner of the world, that you should be more business-like. Really? Why do we have nonprofits? What you should be is more rigorous. You should be more concerned about understanding the outcomes of your work rather than the activities. Yet in government, even in our social innovation fund in the federal government in the United States, they talk constantly about how many people they've touched. I swear, that's the language they use. We've touched 174,000 people. Touched! And I'm like, this is creepy, all right? This is like making me uncomfortable. And that is not an outcome. That just means you served 174,000 people and you raised a bunch of money. These are, useless indicators, right? We want to know about the quality, the outcome, the impact, and so forth. And we want to be very rigorous about it. We want to confront ourselves with the facts. You may believe that the problem with starvation of children in India and Bangladesh is the lack of access to food, right? If only we could get more food to India and Bangladesh. We need to deliver more food. And so we have this whole industry of people who believe the answer is more food, and then we get some entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, who are kind of nerdy. See, that's contrary to the exclusive view. The exclusive view sees social entrepreneurs as very exciting, charismatic, persuasive. But we also have in the inclusive view that social entrepreneurs can be pretty boring. Not very funny, not very personable, but they can do really good work. And in the research space, which is part of defining a problem, researchers in Bangladesh discovered that it's not food that's the problem in starvation. There's plenty of food. What's the problem in starvation in those 2 countries? Child nutrition, what is it? Sanitation. That's because I told you that before, you cheater. We did some heavy lifting research that challenged the conventional wisdom. It's sanitation systems that destroy microbes, that extract nutrition from food. So you can feed a person a lot of food, and in a area where you have lousy sanitation systems, they're not going to get the nutrition from that food. They're just going to be eating and not growing. Now that's social entrepreneurship. Have you ever thought of it that way? That part of social entrepreneurship, that there are entrepreneurs who are very, very quiet, unassuming types who are going to do the breakthrough research that are going to tell other social entrepreneurs what we need to do. Because if you're in the food industry and you're delivering a lot of food in India and Bangladesh, you may want to get involved in the sanitation problem to deal with this particular extraction of knowledge about the problem. But a lot of social entrepreneurs in the exclusive model operate like, I know the problem, I've seen the problem, I've decided what the problem is, and I'm going to solve that problem. But the social entrepreneurs in the research area are saying that's not the problem. The real problem is X, not Y. Do some thinking. So what we start to see as we look at these case studies and we say, gee, there's a lot of social entrepreneurship out there that doesn't win awards and that doesn't get credit and that we don't talk about, but it's social entrepreneurship. It's new methodologies for studying problems. Aggressive methodologies that are being developed and talked about downstairs. Mapping systems, new crowdsourcing devices, new approaches to research, new ways of harnessing knowledge to explain what the problem is. So imagine just for a minute, and we'll wrap up and take some questions, 8 different tasks that we can teach about. 8. One is, how do you activate and sustain the commitment needed to confront the prevailing wisdom? I said number 1 finding here is that business and social entrepreneurship are not the same. In business, when you have a breakthrough idea, it does destroy the market, and the prevailing wisdom, the prevailing product structure tends to disappear. You're working on your iPad, right, or your tablet. We don't. I mean, we've broken through there, but in the social entrepreneurship space, this is politics. This is a battle. There are people who benefit from misery. Is that not true? Does everybody in the world share your great passion for eliminating misery? Or is there a market for misery? Is there? So in the social space, we have to always be aware that there's a prevailing wisdom that got to be the prevailing wisdom by suppressing alternative visions of the future. We're having that big debate about global climate change. Well, I mean, is the climate changing? Is it not changing? You know, the prevailing wisdom says that. These challengers are saying this and that. These are issues where in the social change space we have contestation, and in the business economic space we have creative destruction. It occurs. It's done with. It's over. Destruction is destruction. We don't have so much creative destruction in the conversation in the social space. Second thing I want to tell you is that there are these different tasks where social entrepreneurs are welcome and come in different flavors, whether exclusive or inclusive. One of the most disappointing things that I experience in my work is I'm in a classroom with students or I'm working with others, and people tell me, I can't be an entrepreneur. I'm too boring. I'm just a researcher. You know, or I'm a survey researcher. I do mapping. You know, I do policy analysis. What could be more boring than policy analysis? Don't I have anybody here who's doing policy analysis? I'm a policy analyst. So, you know, the notion is that we need entrepreneurship in many of the areas of breaking through the prevailing social equilibrium. We need social entrepreneurship for activating and sustaining commitment. We need social entrepreneurship for defining problems, new methodologies that will help us figure out where the leverage point is for addressing difficult issues that we care about. And this is policy analysis, mapping, forecasting. We need social entrepreneurship in the area of designing solutions. People who know how to develop different kinds of ideas by crowdsourcing, like Sync, stuff like that. See clickfix.com. You should look at that. Government outsource. I mean, it's a Palo Alto program where in Palo Alto you can report just about anything. Like there's graffiti on the back of a garbage can at this address. Get it cleaned up. So, you know, governments are crowdsourcing to develop solutions, and you got this whole movement towards design thinking. We can help people figure out how to model solutions through aggressive data modeling. We can teach that. We can teach people how to understand. We can teach people how to develop solutions and then project out. Like, why does reducing cigarette smoking increase the federal budget deficit in every country on earth? Why is that? Well, that's a modeling conclusion from the fact that if you reduce smoking, people don't die as fast, and they don't die as young, they live longer, and therefore they collect their pensions. So if we model out what we think is a social good, which is please stop smoking, what we find is that it actually has a budgetary effect that's negative.
Not in Singapore, we don't have pension system.
Well, your health care costs will soar.
We want to stop people from smoking.
Our CBO, our Congressional Budget Office, releases this report on smoking and says, it has long-term budget consequences, and we need to anticipate that. We need to have a 50-cent tax on another 50 cents excise tax in order to deal with the budgetary consequences. That's just truth. That's just truth. It's not pro or con. It's not pro-social or anti-social. It's not good or bad. It's just the fact that if you're going to reduce smoking as we have, it has a consequence, and we need to deal with that externality. So, we've got that. We've got the need for better tools, social entrepreneurship and advocacy. We need social entrepreneurship and delivery. The production function of governments and others who are going to deliver policy. We need social entrepreneurship and financing. We've seen a ton of social entrepreneurship in the financing space about how we pay and fund social entrepreneurship, whether it's through social enterprise of one kind or another, crowdsourcing, fundraising, all sorts of new techniques. Lots of entrepreneurs working on how to fund social entrepreneurship. They don't get a lot of credit, because the standard exclusive notion is that funds will flow to you because you've got a good idea. Good luck with that one. In the space where there's so much competition for scarce public resources and philanthropic investment and so forth. We also need social entrepreneurship on defense, on defending ideas once they're implemented. Okay, so I'll tell you, and I'll close here. I'll just do these two things. We've got the business and social being different, and we've got different tasks, all of which need new combination of ideas from largely different types of people who have different skill sets that we can teach. Do I want to teach every social entrepreneur who wants to run an organization how to do formal modeling? Really? Strategic planning, of the kind that I see, scenario analysis, robust adaptive planning, which is a technique that Rand's developed. Do you need to know that? No, you can buy it. You can bring somebody onto your team, or you can contract out for it. We got to combine that. And maybe your social entrepreneur, the head of this little effort, might have a special skill in advocacy, community organizing, lobbying Congress or the Parliament, developing ideas through or developing solutions to problems by changing mindsets. Some of the most creative social entrepreneurs in this world are documentarians, filmmakers. And everybody talks about the Skoll Foundation and how much Jeff Skoll, who is a co-founder of eBay, which was obviously a social good producing innovation. They'll sell you anything now. But Jeff Skoll and Participant Media, his filmmaking production operation, have probably done more to change mindsets about things like bullying and environmental change and so forth than the Skoll Foundation has through its grants to individual organizations that are pursuing social entrepreneurship. So we need all of this. My basic point here is that many of these things can be taught. We have enormous stocks of knowledge already on doing the policy analysis, the social advocacy, the framing of messages to affect public opinion, to support change, norming and so forth. We've got tons of skills, including courses on public finance and financial management and investment, that we can teach. So this is not something where it's the lone wolf out there stalking social change against a very, very dangerous adversary, kind of a Frankenstein that will not die. It's going to come back at you. I won't say anything more about these monsters of resistance. Because then I'll say something about Sarah Palin, and you don't even know who Sarah is. But when the new health insurance program was enacted, there was a movement in the United States to scuttle by basically having the states reject the federal law. Just they would vote not to have the law in their states, and that was declared unconstitutional in 1828. So 200 years after that Supreme Court decision, it still lives. It's like you can't kill it. You just can't. You can't do it. So my point here is that we've got a lot of work to do. There's entrepreneurship in a lot of different corners, and we ought to activate it. It's not necessarily the tap dancing heroic lone wolf. It can be somebody who's pretty boring and has a pocket protector with lots of pencils and that kind of thing. I haven't seen too many pocket protectors here in Singapore either. Is there a rule against that? I'm not getting that one. So you get my point here. Social entrepreneurship is not the special province of anyone. It can be done by teams, it can be done by individuals, it can be done in government, it can be done outside government to affect government. It can be done in old nonprofits to renew them or to augment what they're already doing well. It doesn't belong in any space, and the exclusivity approach that this is just one person that we have to identify damages that inclusive model, that we have lots of work to do and we need lots of different people engaged in it. I'm rather fond of formal modelers, believe it or not. I rather like them. But they're curious people. And to work with them and imagine them as social entrepreneurs is sometimes hard to do. Just like imagining a political scientist as a social entrepreneur. Oh my goodness, that's a reach. How many political scientists we have here in this room? Well, one or two. So let's open it up for questions. I strongly encourage you to broaden your focus so that you don't buy into any particular model. Solve the problem. Solve the problem. That's your mantra. Do it. Follow the path that we help you understand, and maybe we will change this world. Yes, that's it.
Well, Prof. Janet, thank you very much. Sure. My name is Ines. I'm just a lay person, Prof. Coming back to your first slide, I think that the inconvenient truth being that for hundreds of years, and in fact that is the 20C problem that recur until now. If you miss the point, you have entrepreneurship. You mentioned cat and dog, but
right.
For all that about the SHEEP, that the world's best friend is the sheep. And that is why it is the problem with the English language. Neither SHIP, SHEEP makes the sense of the language. That, if you understand, that's the core problem. You see, knowledge is varies. When you talk about expertise and the others beyond the common sense, then that's one thing. Now, coming back to your method, when you talk about the context of beyond methodologies. The question is that I'm rather neutral because you need combination after you have conceptualized what fundamental requirement is all about. The team comes second, and that's exactly what professed by the co-founder of Apple. That Steve was insisting that it's a one-man show in terms of many things. And one central social entrepreneurship of Japan, international unbeatable until now, the Red Cross. It is the auxiliary the Department of World Government adopted a government.
I gotcha.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks for it.
Well, one of the things, the seeds in your conversation, your point is that many of the existing organizations that we now dismiss were once seen as great entrepreneurial engines. We talk about Florence Nightingale. She's mentioned all the time in websites about social entrepreneurs Andrew Carnegie and the library system and so forth. But incidentally, we talk about them as if their ideas did not survive. They became part of the prevailing wisdom about how you solve problems. And the Red Cross has needed renewal. Governments need renewal, but we still need governments. There's a neoliberal theme that runs through much of the social entrepreneurship community that government has failed, old nonprofits have failed. The answer is in privatization and markets, and that's where we're going to find the answer to our problems. It's a very narrow conceptualization, and it is a form. It's an ideology, and you do get ideas out of it, and you don't run with them. It's about solving the problem. Now, did you say sheep? Is that what you, yeah?
Not just cat and dog, but sheep. I suppose they're followers, they're parts of
That's a really,
following, but they're part of the game.
Well, Ashoka, which, I've known for a long time, Bill Drayton's, and they've got Ashoka all over the world, it's 2,500 fellows. They've only awarded 2 fellowships in their entire history to a pair. It's always to individuals. That's fine. Because, you get entrepreneurship from them, but don't think that that's the only source. I'm doing this project for a foundation in the United States that wants to invest all of its endowment in its mission, which is to create living wage jobs. So they want to invest in companies and make deals that produce good jobs. Now, I'm doing a project with them called the Bellwether Project. Do you know what a bellwether is? So I got sheep on my mind. A bellwether is a leader of the flock that you bell. So you always know where the flock is because you hear that ringing. And we're looking for good indicators that might tell us whether we have a false positive on an investment. Because everybody is saying they're going to change the world. They're doing CSR, corporate social responsibility. But what might tell us that they're lying? Because we don't want to invest in a false positive. And so we're looking for bellwethers. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. If you don't mind, just one point. Because you're dealing with government, but you never convey to the government. Most government consider change is evil.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. That's the heart of the problem.
Can government innovate? Absolutely. Ironically, I was talking this morning. So I came into this field in the early 80s, and one of my first confrontations with the dangers of highly motivated, passionate entrepreneurship in government was the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. That was a product of passionate entrepreneurial thinking on the part of NASA and the lack of awareness and responsiveness to clear signals that this launch was virtually doomed from the start. So government can be quite entrepreneurial. Our government in the United States, our National Security Agency, is really innovative in spying on the citizens of the United States. We're not very good at keeping track of people who sneak into the United States and make improvised explosive devices that they use at the Boston Marathon. We knew they were here. We had them on 2 watch lists. But we were so busy with innovative techniques for monitoring our own citizens that we lost track of those 2, the older brother who was on the watch list and his younger brother. So I believe government can be innovative, but it takes a lot of work to break it down so it can get back to its original sense. And, there's a lot of sclerotic clogging in government, and you have to be aware of it too, the 6 notes of the piano problem. There's a density in agencies that boggles the mind.
Others, please, go ahead. Anyone? Yeah, please. Introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Bob, student from ISIS. Professor Lai, I wanted to ask you a question, is that how you interpret the relationship among the social entrepreneur and the people who choose to work with social business and the corporation very focused on the social CSR. Because if possible, if we go on the right tracks and we can go, because among the freeze, if we can maximize and then we'll go on the right track for the society in the future. Thank you.
Well, look, there's so much activity in here. In this space, it's marvelous and bedeviling. You know, there's just so much going on. What's not to like about social enterprise? I mean, it's another way of sustaining efforts to address problems. I see it, and many people see it, as a way of subsidizing social change, and you know, it's great, it's fine. Just don't think that it's the only answer. That's the point here. Corporate social responsibility, we got to work on that. Because we don't have good systems. We need good, solid research that will tell us what's real about it. And there is a movement now towards regulating, or at least assessing through the securities regulatory bodies, whether corporations are falsely portraying themselves or not. People are trying to figure out how you know, hold corporations accountable for their assertions, and how we measure and how we understand what's going on. What's not to like about corporate social responsibility, unless it's a lie? Same thing with sort of any change effort. I mean, we need to have, having corporations doing well while doing good is great. You know, the research on this area is very fuzzy. I'll just tell you that if you want to get a really good article on corporate social responsibility, you want to follow this up as a researcher, there's an article called License to Ill, I-L-L, that shows that companies that are morally centered and leaders who promote sort of this moralistic vision of corporate responsibility are actually more likely to commit heinous acts of corporate abuse. What's that about? So, yeah. Look at the article. The methodology's, so-so-y, but it's an interesting argument that the more of a reputation you have for being socially responsible, the more freedom you have to be socially irresponsible. So it's like social capital in the sense that reputational capital, and there's a whole field in business marketing on reputational capital. It is called reputational capital. That the more stock you have of reputational capital, the more profitable you'll be through consumer loyalty. But you can use some of that capital to do things that may not be socially responsible. You might hoard reputational capital in case something goes really wrong at your chemical plant in the middle of nowhere. You know what I mean? So we need people to be looking in this space and saying, just because you put the word social in front of what you're doing doesn't mean what you're doing is making a contribution. There's a big dispute over water in the sub-Saharan. Should we put in more pumps, or should we do the big dig, infrastructure projects to deliver water? There's a big dispute between the diggers and the infrastructure builders. And it's the same in the climate change field, that people who want to mitigate climate change in the short and mid-run are in a constant battle with people who argue that mitigation will weaken demand for climate change regulation. A lot going on in this space, a lot of conflict, because this is not about bringing a new version of the iPod into the market. And by the way, I use Mac. I'm a Mac guy, but I have a Samsung Mini, smartphone, and I'm technically not smart enough to use it. Seriously, it's hard to get used to. I miss my BlackBerry. So this is a contested space. Drill into it, be skeptical, but also be celebratory when you see something that's actually working, and don't expect that, old institutions, just because they're old, can't innovate. That's not true. They can. They might not do it full time. The American Red Cross has a very, very clear mission, but it can deliver it better. That's what we found out in Katrina, our Hurricane Katrina, that it could deliver better. And Docs Without Borders is one of the best delivery organizations. They don't do anything innovative except they've developed a delivery system that is awesome. And the thing that's really quite exceptional about them is that when they raise enough money to deal with a disaster, they stop raising money. That's amazing, really, because the best time to raise money for the Red Cross and other disaster relief organizations is during a really significant disaster where people will just turn around, and Docs Without Borders will say, we got enough, we're not accepting any more contributions. I don't know what that is. I don't know whether that's socially responsible or what, but it's really admirable.
Yes, I'm a friend of the Kuan School. I want to ask a question because it always puzzles me. I wrote an article more than a decade ago about the Nobel Prize laureate while I was at Cambridge. Then it is actually I use your terms, kitchens. They discover the Nobel Prize from the kitchens. And you also mentioned the Bill Gates, invent the Microsoft, from the garage.
Right.
This is a story.
Oh.
But how, what I discovered, it might be regarding we call it the culture, which we often, argue about, Asia, Asian countries, do not have that sort of, culture to allow the social entrepreneurs to flourish.
Yeah.
The Western culture, like, at university, some university, I think, including Princeton, Cambridge, they allow, we call it blue sky research.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it can, have the, culture that if you are a professor, you would, try to think something, interesting. Yeah. And the university would not, push you, publish or perish. Working for the university. Do you think the environment, we call it, entrepreneurial culture is a part to play in the social entrepreneurship?
Can you restate the question a little bit? Because
There's this idea that in the West, there's more, there's a context that allows for more entrepreneurship and blue sky thinking. But in Asia, the idea is that, Asians are not quite so entrepreneurial, or they're not given the context in which blue sky thinking is permitted or welcomed.
Well,
Is there a cultural context?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think the millennials are, I think we need to sort of understand the globalization of creativity. But I can't really answer that. I think the interesting thing to me about, I happened to be in Palo Alto the day after Steve Jobs died. I don't know what happened here in terms of, you must have an Apple store someplace, right? You've got BlackBerry stores. I was shocked by that, actually, that they're still alive. In Palo Alto that day after, they put up Post-it notes with messages to Steve Jobs. Like, one person wrote a note saying, "I hope this doesn't void my warranty." That's a really nice little thing. But, Post-it notes, which is arguably the least, why not put up some sort of razzmatazz, but Post-it notes were the product of accidental invention, as you know from the 3M story. A failed adhesive that turned out to have a purpose. Sometimes solutions look for problems. And that's what happened with the Post-it note. And then we celebrate, Steve Jobs' life by putting up Post-it notes. And I thought to myself, I wonder what he's thinking about that. What would he say to people who are using Post-it notes? Would he have been happy? And they're all linear. They're all organized properly. So when you looked at the store, I got pictures of this. It was, different colors, all straight lined. There were occasional big Post-it notes, but they were, properly blocked and so forth. I don't know. I mean, I think the culture may be the problem, and how do you allow the blue sky thinking. But I think if you do the rigorous analysis, maybe you've got a chance. I don't know. It's a great question. The Ashoka people and other funders believe that culture is no longer a barrier to social entrepreneurship anywhere because of globalization. I'm not sure that's true, and I do agree with the social entrepreneurs who are working on improving governance in countries where we want to provide and solve problems like hunger and disease. Corruption is a very serious issue, and you have to remove those barriers before you can innovate because of the creaming of the funding you have available to solve a problem.
From India.
So,
Yes.
Regarding this cultural innovation, that how the culture basically is conducive for that innovation, just want to point one thing. I'm not sure whether that is correct or not. In US, there is a chapter 11,
yeah,
which is basically for bankruptcy.
right.
So if I remember correctly, then it is basically for entrepreneurship, because you can, even if your venture fails, then you can go and file that under chapter 11.
Correct.
Then you are given a time, so that it's basically conducive for the entrepreneurship. So it's like in financial, basically in business terms, then it's you are basically laws there, which is basically facilitating that.
So tell me then, what social entrepreneur should work on in India? Should they work on creating the regulatory structures to allow for Chapter 11 bankruptcies?
No,
Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying regarding that culture.
Yeah.
In business, at least that part is there in US, where you can go under Chapter 11 file for bankruptcy. So there is a protection available that which allows more of entrepreneurs to come up with different ventures.
But we're trying to fit
But back to you.
Yeah.
So in India or maybe back to you,
In India.
what are the few things that you'd like to see happen in order to facilitate even more innovation, social innovation, and social entrepreneurship?
As far as social entrepreneurship is there, I think one thing is that fund has to be there. Money has to be there. I think that is the basic thing. Second is the mindset. Like in US, if we are a billionaire, then you after some when you are retiring from your, then you basically distribute. It's not given to the family people. At least that thing is not there in India. If you have a family business, it's basically you give it to your son or that whosoever is your relative. So that may be a cultural thing, which may not that entrepreneurship may not be conducive for that.
Please go ahead.
Hi, Professor. My name is Laura Lynn. I'm currently a business school student based in Barcelona called IESE.
I know IAC.
Great. I'm interning this summer in Singapore.
That's cool.
As part of a Singapore-funded government think tank.
Good.
It's called the Human Capital Leadership Institute. I have a very practical question. I'm just wondering, I'm sorry that was late. I couldn't actually get a cab for 30 minutes.
Yeah, you need Uber. It's here, but
Well, I'm looking forward to this though. So my question is just in terms of, based on this inclusive vision, What are some platforms, collaborative platforms that you, from your experience, is quite popular or quite forward-thinking that we could, check out and connect ourselves to? Thank you.
I was saying this morning, we're trying to figure out how to enhance social capital. You're struggling with that. I'm very impressed with the crowdsourcing activity that I see. It's not fully developed yet. Some of it's pretty, pedantic, and so I can report to government that I have a garbage can turned over in my alley. But there's some power there about sourcing solutions and thinking. And we know from markets, knowledge markets, predicting elections, for example, that these are very effective tools. So I'd work on those platforms. How do we ask publics to participate and pay attention to them? Because if you ask them to participate and then you say, well, we really weren't serious, but it's nice to have all your input, that's it. You don't get it no more. So I'm kind of impressed with that. I'm not a big fan of the open data platforms. I mean, they're overwhelming. I don't recommend that you go that direction with government reforms. You should be maximally transparent, but we can talk about that. I do like the crowdsourcing. There's something special about it, and I can't quite figure it out.
And if I'm hearing you correctly, that sounds more of a platform for identifying issues more, but my question was more in terms of connecting with other people of expertise in order to form a team to address a common passion. Is there such a platform?
Why wouldn't you? I mean, you're not just looking for input on problems through crowdsourcing. You're looking for input on solutions. And you're trying to stimulate communities and small groups to solve their own problems. So we can talk a little bit about that. For forming teams, I go to Open IDEO. Go to that website and take a look at what they're promoting. Do I believe in design thinking? I mean, how do we do that? How do you build teams? I like what they're doing. I'm not sure that we can bottle it. Do you know what I mean? You and I should have a side conversation. I'm proud of you, and I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing. I would say on the microfinance that it's a good example where about half of microfinance projects are failures and poorly designed. And that's a product of randomized control studies that are being done by kind of nerdy social scientists at poverty action labs around the world. So if you want to get into microfinance and address these some of these barriers, pick your targets carefully and try to figure out what we learned from failure and see where that takes us. But I'm just where I am on this platform. Yes.
Go ahead, maybe last comment or question?
But I can just speak up.
Of course you can.
Hi, thank you, Professor. I'm Natalie from Sweden, and I just came from China where I conducted some research on social accountability of high social enterprises.
Good.
And how they think about it. And I assumed at the beginning that everybody loves social accountability and social impact measurements. However, that is not the case, because many of these entrepreneurs feel that it's a restriction. It's kind of an imposed measurements. They don't have time to tackle social accountability. Instead, they think that their intentions are good enough. And this kind of shook off my world on social accountability, and I'm basically curious how you think about where, at what time in a social enterprise or in this movement of creating change, social accountability comes in, and when should we start measuring impact to be sure that the social is not being kind of washed, like greenwashing, but social washing?
Well, it has to be at the very start. There is such a thing as too much passion. So much belief in the power of your idea that you cannot be shaken by reality. Yes, entrepreneurs will say, oh, you can't measure what I do. And I occasionally just will say to an audience of nonprofit or entrepreneurs or whatever, I'll say, stump me. Tell me something that you think we can't measure from the beginning of your project. And the wildest example was a program in Philadelphia for preventing teenage pregnancy. I was kind of like, well, I think we can figure out whether your intervention is effective pretty easily. What do you think? So specify if it's not preventing pregnancy, then specify what your outcome is from the beginning. The entrepreneur should be saying, it is the problem, stupid. How will we know we're successful if we are? And how do we discipline ourselves to that? It's not about me. It's not about me being an Ashoka Fellow. It's not about me winning a prize. It's about solving a problem. If that means I have to work with other people, even though I'm antisocial, which is true about me, actually, so be it. It's about the problem. And that's the issue is that so many people get wrapped up in their idea that they don't want to be challenged and asked to look at the measurement because they're sucking down resources that could go elsewhere. Too much passion, too much. And, you're not going to be very popular by asking about outcomes. You're not going to get invited to lots of parties by asking for more discipline. You're just not. But that's what it's about right now. Do you want to take a quick?
Okay. Last one,
we'll talk.
and then we'll wrap.
Yeah.
Sure. My name is Clive. I've been working Singapore International Competition. My question is about the definition of entrepreneurship. Why it is so difficult to have a consensus on the definition? Why the academia is still debating about it?
Well, that's the nature of academics. I just got into a lot of trouble for even raising the question of what it is. It's been 10 years of this ongoing gunfight within the field about whether to be exclusive or inclusive or whatever. And, I've come to the point now where I don't care. I could use a different set of terms. I don't give a care. Let's stop talking about what it is. Let's center on the problem and deal with the tasks and the disciplines you're going to need to solve it. And one of them is good measurement, good understanding of the problem. What is its cause? What is its consequence? What is its size? What is its future? And if you can't, at the beginning of your process, define how you'll know that you've been successful. I'm not talking about a tight business plan, although in social enterprise you better have one. You ain't going to get the money without it. It's not about the words. I read a blog last night in preparation for this today where this guy was writing about the need to distinguish between entrepreneurship and enterprise. And by the end of his blog post, he was like writing in real time, he was using the term innovation and, throwing all sorts of stuff but the kitchen sink in there. And one of the questions is, for defining terms is just to say, look, you're beginning a journey. Here are the skills and approaches you're going to need in order to complete it successfully. And, I believe in an inclusive approach to this. Everybody in this room can do this. We need to help. It's not about finding the 1 in 10 million. It could be you. It might not be. It could be you. But I can say everybody in this room can do it in this kind of exclusive model. And I don't care what you call it. Just do it. And focus on the problem. Call yourself anything. Just call it out.
Well, would a sentence like meeting an unmet social need in a way that's not been done before?
No.
What would be the problem with that?
Social entrepreneurship, to me, has to be distinguished from innovation. I don't want to go into too much depth. Innovation is about fine-tuning and diffusing. That's how, but we don't, in common usage, the common usage of these terms change. Social entrepreneurship is the process of developing a new combination of ideas for a new program, product, process, market, or reduction in waste and negative externalities, moral hazard, those kinds of things. For solving a heretofore deemed intractable social problem. So I'm saying it can be something that's a combination of very old stuff. In fact, the best research suggests that a lot of the good stuff we need to do are combinations of things we've already been doing, and we need social entrepreneurs to step up and invent new ways of defending programs. Last comment. I cannot think of a single social entrepreneur who went to Washington last year to defend programs that we know work for helping mothers, women, infants, and children with nutritional assistance. Not one social entrepreneur that I know of made any effort whatsoever to protect programs that we know work. Now, what's that about? Is there so little regard for what we have that works that we're willing to abandon it in order to do our special project? I just think we've got to do both. We've got some programs that work pretty well, we've got to defend them, and we've got some problems that we just haven't been able to solve, and we haven't come up with a good solution. So, it's about a combination of action. And I think we need new methodologies. A social entrepreneur who learns how to crowdsource lobbying and cross-check the huge amounts of money that fuel the process, that would be a real innovation or a real way to conquer some significant social problems. Lots of places where you can make a difference through new combinations of ideas.
Okay.
We can't go any further. You and I can have a conversation.
Yeah. Well, on that note, because you did say that was your final comment, but you will note that you did get a definition, right?
Yep.
Yeah, over there.